hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole. No, it was a hobbit-hole, and that means comfort. This hobbit was very well-to-do, and his name was Baggins. Oh, I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays. They are, or were, a little people about half our height and smaller than the bearded dwarves. They wear no shoes because their feet grow natural leathery soles and thick, warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly. Oh, and they have dinner twice a day when they can get it. Now, the mother of this hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, that is, was the famous Belladonna Took. And the fact was that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, for once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. So it's probable that Bilbo, Belladonna's only son, got something a bit odd in his make-up from the Took side. By some curious chance, one morning long ago when Bilbo Baggins was grown up and thoroughly respectable, he was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long pipe, when Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you'd heard only a quarter of what I've heard about him, you'd be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. But the old man hadn't been down that way for ages and ages.
"Good morning," said Bilbo, and he blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking.
"I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning," said Gandalf. "I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone."
Well, I should think so, in these parts. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things, adventures. You might try over the hill, or across the water.
You mean you want to get rid of me?
Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see, I don't think I know your name.
Yes, my dear sir. And I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me.
Gandalf? Gandalf! Good gracious me! Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties. Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. Oh, I remember those. I beg your pardon, but I'd no idea you were still in business.
Oh, where else should I be? All the same, I'm pleased to find you remember something about me. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, I will go so far as to send you to this adventure.
I'm sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye. Goodbye.
And with that, the hobbit turned and scuttled inside and shut his round green door as quickly as he dared. Well, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. Gandalf stepped up to the door and with the spike on his staff scratched a peculiar sign there. The next day, Bilbo had almost forgotten about Gandalf until just before tea time there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. But it wasn't Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. He pushed inside just as if he'd been expected and hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg. And then, with a low bow, he said,
"Dwalin at your service."
Bilbo Baggins at yours, said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. I'm just about to take tea. Pray, come and have some with me.
Well, they hadn't been at the table long when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. Still, it wasn't Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf with a white beard and a scarlet hood. This one called himself Balin, and also behaved as if he'd been invited. A few moments later, 2 more dwarves, Keely and Feely, had arrived. Well, then Bilbo barely had enough time to collect his wits before he was saying, "At your service to Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin and Gloin." All these dwarves wanted feeding, and Bilbo was kept very busy for a while, until there came a hard rat-tat on the beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo, very angry, pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves, 4 more. And there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He'd made quite a dent on the beautiful door, and also knocked out the secret mark.
Carefully, Bilbo. Let me introduce Bifur, Bofur, Bomber, and especially Thorin.
The party was now complete, and Gandalf, Thorin, and the others gave their orders for tea. This Thorin was none other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who wasn't at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat, until Bilbo's repeated apologies made him stop frowning.
Pray, don't mention it.
The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on. At last, they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses.
I suppose you'll all stay to supper?
Of course. And after. We shan't get through the business till late. Now, clear up.
Thereupon, the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, for he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and everything was cleared and put away safe as quick as lightning. As the dwarves returned, Gandalf called for silence.
Let Thorin speak.
Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit, to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon start on a long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, may never return.
After being called audacious and fellow conspirator, poor Bilbo could bear it no longer. At "may never return," a shriek burst out of him like the whistle of a steam engine coming out of a tunnel. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare, the poor hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. They took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing-room sofa, and then they went back to their dark business.
Excitable little fellow, gets funny odd fits. But he's one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch.
If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you'll realise that this was only poetical exaggeration when applied to any hobbit. After he'd revived a little, Bilbo crept nervously to the door of the parlour. Gloin was speaking.
Will he do you think? If it hadn't been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we'd come to the wrong house. This little fellow looks more like a grocer than a burglar.
Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. His toque side was beginning to show itself.
Pardon me, I have no signs painted on my door, and I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it.
I assure you there is a mark on this door. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it's usually read.
Of course there was a mark. Let's have no more arguments. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp and let's have a little light on this.
On the table, in the light of a big lamp, he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map.
This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin. It is a plan of the Lonely Mountain.
Thorin remembered well the lands around the mountain, and knew only too well of the dragon's presence there.
There is one point that you haven't noticed. You see that rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls.
It may have been a secret once, but old Smaug has lived there long enough now to find out anything there is to know about those caves.
He may, but he can't have used it for years and years.
Why?
Because it is too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes. But Smaug couldn't creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Also, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key. A small and curious key. Here it is. Keep it safe.
Indeed I will. This news alters things much for the better. We none of us liked the idea of the front gate. The dragon comes out of it far too often, unless he's changed his habits.
That is why I settled on burglary. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans.
Well, first, I should like to know a bit more about things, said Bilbo, so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required and remuneration, and so forth. By which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive?
Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north and came back to this mountain on the map. They mined and tunnelled and found a good deal of gold and jewels. My grandfather was king under the mountain again and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who built the merry town of Dale close by. Undoubtedly, it It was the treasure that brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know. And in the north in those days, there was a most specially greedy, strong and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he came south. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one, luckily. Well, from a good way off, we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame. The dwarves rushed out of their own gate, but none escaped. Then the dragon destroyed most of the warriors of Dale. Then he crept into the mountain, and soon there were no dwarves left alive inside. And he took all their wealth for himself. We were unexpectedly joined outside by my father and grandfather. They said that one day, in the proper time, I'd know how they got away. Apparently they'd made a map, and I'd like to know how Gandalf got hold of it.
I didn't get hold of it. I was given it. Your grandfather gave the map to his son before he was killed by goblins in the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with a map 100 years ago, but he never got near the mountain. I found him in the dungeons of the necromancer.
Whatever were you doing there?
Never you mind. But even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering and had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key.
We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria. We must give a thought to the necromancer.
Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you.
Hear.
Hear what?
Hear what I have to say. I should say that you ought to go east and have a look round. After all, there is a side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes. I suppose if you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you'll think of something. Now, I think we've talked for long enough for one night. You see what I mean? What about bed and an early start and all that? I'll give you a good breakfast before you go.
Before we go, I suppose you mean. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't getting inside the door your job? But I agree about bed and breakfast.
Next morning, however, it was long after the break of day when Bilbo woke up, and when he went into the dining room, he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. Really, he was relieved to think that they'd all gone without him. So he washed up and was just sitting down to a nice little breakfast when in walked Gandalf. The wizard found for him the note the dwarves had left on the mantelpiece, which he'd missed as he cleared away, and this is what the note said.
Thorin and company to burglar Bilbo. Greetings. For your hospitality, our sincere thanks, and for your offer of professional assistance, our grateful acceptance. Terms. Cash on delivery, all travelling expenses guaranteed, funeral expenses defrayed by us. Shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. Yours deeply...
That left Bilbo just 10 minutes.
Yeah, but...
No time for it. No time for that either. Off you go.
Very puffed Bilbo was when he got to the inn just on the stroke of 11, and found that he'd come without even a pocket handkerchief. The dwarves had arranged everything: ponies, baggages, packages, parcels, and paraphernalia. There was even a spare cloak and hood for Bilbo. And that's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May on laden ponies. They hadn't been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid on a white horse. He'd brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after that, the party went along very merrily, and Bilbo began to feel that adventures weren't so bad after all. Tomorrow, we'll tell you how Bilbo began to change his mind. Goodbye till then. hobbit, Bilbo Baggins. The 13 dwarves, led by Thorin Oakenshield and Gandalf the wizard, had set off from Hobbiton one morning just before May. They were heading east to the Lonely Mountain to take revenge on the great dragon Smaug, who'd destroyed both the dwarves' underground city and the nearby town of Dale. They'd been travelling for a few days now, and were far into the Lone Lands. The roads had become steadily worse, and the weather was now cold and wet.
Oh, bother burgling and everything to do with it, grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along on his pony behind the others in a very muddy track.
It was nearly night when they crossed an ancient stone bridge over a river swollen with the rains. And not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. He simply wasn't there at all. In the end, they decided they'd have to camp where they were among the trees. But one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away off him. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper, and even less for breakfast. Then Balin noticed a light shining out of a dark mass of trees on a hillside some way off. It began to rain worse than ever, and in spite of the possible dangers in those wild lands, they decided to investigate. They made off, leading their ponies silently in the direction of the light. And suddenly, it shone out, red and bright, through the tree trunks not far ahead.
Now it's the burglar's turn, said Thorin, eyeing Bilbo. Scuttle off and come back quick if all is well. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we'll do what we can.
Off Bilbo had to go, before he could explain that he couldn't hoot even once like any kind of owl. But at any rate, hobbits can move quietly in woods, absolutely quietly. So naturally, he got right up to the fire, for fire it was, without disturbing anyone. And this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting round a very large fire of beech logs. They were toasting mutton, drinking out of jugs, and talking about eating man flesh. They were trolls, obviously trolls. Even Bilbo could see that. He was very much alarmed, yet somehow he couldn't go straight back to Thorin and company empty-handed. He stood and hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he'd heard of, picking the trolls' pockets seemed the least difficult. 2 of the trolls, whose names appeared to be Tom and Bert, went over to a beer barrel to refill their jugs. The 3rd troll, William, stayed where he was, and Bilbo plucked up courage, reached out from behind the tree, and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, but trolls' purses are the very mischief. "Here, who are you?" it squeaked, and William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck.
Sure, Bert, look what I've copped.
Well, what is it?
Lummy if I knows. What are ya?
Bilbo Baggins, a burr, a hobbit.
A burrer? Hobbit?
Perhaps there are more like him round about and we might make a pie. You, are there any more of your sort of sneaking in these here woods?
And he picked the hobbit up by the toes and shook him.
Yes, lots. No, none at all, not one.
Oh, poor little blighter. Let him go.
Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all. I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks.
No, I won't have it.
You're a fat fool, William.
And you're a lout.
And I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins, says Bert, and puts his fist in William's eye.
There was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, while the 3rd troll, Tom, whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little feet had been very squashed in Bert's big paw, and he'd no breath in his body, so he lay for a while, panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Then right in the middle of the fight, up came Balin. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting, and before Balin knew what was happening, a sack was over his head and he was down.
No burrow hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves.
I reckon you're right, and we'd best get out to the light.
And so they did, and that's how all the dwarves came to be captured in sacks, one by one, while poor Bilbo dared not move in case the trolls hurt him and found him again. The trolls had just agreed to roast the dwarves now and eat them later, when a voice said,
"No good roasting them now, it'd take all night."
Well, Bert thought it was William, and William was sure it was Bert. That started the argument again. And each time they reached agreement, Gandalf, for it was his voice, started them bickering and quarrelling again, until the dawn came, and all three trolls were turned forever to stone. For trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they're made of. After Gandalf and Bilbo had released the dwarves from their smelly bags, they searched about and found the trolls' cave. There was a good deal of food jumbled among an untidy litter of plunder of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins. There were, too, several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Gandalf and Thorin each took one with particularly beautiful scabbards, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It was as good as a short sword for the hobbit.
These look like good blades, but when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them.
They carried out the pots of gold and such food as was fit to eat, and had breakfast. Then they buried the gold, putting a great many spells over it, just in case they ever had a chance to come back and recover it. Then they mounted their ponies and jogged along again on the path towards the east.
Where did you go to, if I may ask?
To look ahead.
And what brought you back in the nick of time?
Looking behind. I went to spy out our road. I hadn't gone very far when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell. It was they who told me of the trolls. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. So, now you know.
The valley of Rivendell lies close to the foot of the Misty Mountains, and there, in the last homely house, Elrond and his elves made the travellers welcome. Bilbo loved elves, though he seldom met them. But dwarves think them foolish for their songs, their laughter, and their teasing, and this is a very foolish thing to think. They stayed long in that good house, 14 days at least. All of the travellers, the ponies as well, grew refreshed and strong. And so the time came to Midsummer Eve, and they were to go again with the early sun on Midsummer morning. Now Elrond, the master of the house, knew all about runes of every kind, and that day he looked first at the swords they'd brought from the troll's lair.
Yes, they're old swords. Very old swords of the high elves of the west, my kid. They were made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars.
The runes named Thorin's sword Orcrist, the Goblin Cleaver, and Gandalf's Glamdring, Foe Hammer. Elrond could only guess how the trolls had come by them, stolen them from some other thieves' plunder or dragon's hoard, perhaps. Next, Thorin showed Elrond the map of the Lonely Mountain made by his father. The moon was shining in a broad silver crescent, and Elrond held up the map, and the white light shone through it.
Ah, what is this? There are moon letters here, besides the plain runes which say 5 feet high the door and 3 may walk abreast.
This door, you'll remember, was the secret side entrance to the mountain, through which Thorin's father and grandfather had escaped when Smaug first descended.
What are moon letters?
Moon letters are rune letters, but they can only be seen when the moon shines behind them.
What do they say?
Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun, with the last light of Durin's day, will shine upon the keyhole.
Durin, he was the father of the eldest race of dwarves and my first ancestor. I am his heir. We still call it Durin's Day when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. But it passes our skill in these days to guess when such a time will come again.
There was no more to be learned from the map, and the next morning the travellers rode away with their hearts ready for more adventures. Long days after they'd left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. And all was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. They were all thankful when Feely and Killy found a cave big enough to shelter them all. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious, and And soon the dwarves had changed into dry clothes, fed themselves and the ponies, and were talking merrily about the storm and what each would do with his share of the treasure. And so they dropped off to sleep, one by one. Somehow, when Bilbo slept, he had very nasty dreams, and he woke with a start to find that part of one of the dreams was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave, and was already a wide passage, and the last of the pony's tails was just disappearing into it. But of course he gave a very loud yell. At that, out jumped the goblins. There were 6 to each dwarf at least, and 2 even for Bilbo, and they were all grabbed and carried through the crack before you could say tinder and flint. But not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had wakened him up wide in a splintered second, and when goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash of lightning, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarves were on the wrong side of it. The goblins hurried them along, deep into the darkness of the mountain, and at long last, hobbit and dwarves stumbled into a big cavern lit by a great red fire. It was full of goblins. The ponies were already there, huddled in a corner, and I'm afraid that was the last they ever saw of them. For goblins eat ponies and other much more dreadful things, and they're always hungry. The goblins chained their prisoners together and dragged them in line to the far end of the cavern, where sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, the Great Goblin.
Who are these miserable persons?
Dwarves? And this, said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so he fell forward on his knees.
Now goblins hate everybody and everything, but they had a special grudge against Thorin's people since the war in the mines of Moria. The goblin guards had also found Thorin's elvish sword, Orcrist. They hated it, and hated worse anyone that carried it. Things would have gone badly for Thorin, but at that moment all the lights in the cavern went out, and the great fire went off, poof, into a tower of blue glowing smoke that scattered piercing white sparks among all the goblins. The yells and yammering, howls, growls and curses that followed were beyond description, for the sparks were burning holes in the goblins. Suddenly a sword flashed in its own light, and Bilbo saw it go right through the great goblin as he stood dumbfounded. He fell dead, and the goblin soldiers fled before the sword, shrieking into the darkness. The sword went back into its sheath.
Follow me, quick, said a voice fierce and quiet.
Before Bilbo understood what had happened, he was trotting along again as fast as he could trot down more dark passages. Not for a long while did they stop, and by that time they must have been right down in the very mountain's heart. Then Gandalf lit up his wand. Of course, it was Gandalf. He took out his sword again, and it burned with a rage that made it gleam if goblins were about. It made no trouble whatever of cutting through the goblin chains and setting all the prisoners free. Gandalf made sure that everyone, all 13 dwarves and Bilbo, were safe, and then he handed to Thorin his sword, Orcrist. Gandalf had even managed to save that.
Well, it might be worse, and then again, it might be a great deal better. No ponies and no food and no knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go.
So on they went. Tomorrow, we'll tell you where to. Goodbye. Our travellers had been crossing the Misty Mountains when they were caught in a terrific storm. While they were sheltering in a cave, all of them except Gandalf were taken prisoner by goblins and led deep into the mountain's tunnels. Using his magic, The wizard had managed to rescue all 13 dwarves, the hobbit, and even Thorin's great sword Orcrist. But things might have been a great deal better.
No ponies, no food, and not knowing quite where we are, and hordes of angry goblins just behind. On we go.
On they went, faster than ever. And as Bilbo couldn't possibly go half as fast, the dwarves took it in turn to carry him on their backs. Still, goblins go faster than dwarves, and they ran without torches, as swift as weasels in the dark. And quite suddenly, Dory, now at the back carrying Bilbo, was grabbed from behind. He shouted and fell, and the hobbit rolled off his shoulders into the blackness, bumped his head on hard rock, and remembered nothing more. When at last he opened his eyes, no one was anywhere near him. He'd been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a long while. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours. Suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal lying on the floor of the tunnel. He put it in his pocket almost without thinking. It was a turning point in his career, but he didn't know it. And for now he couldn't think what to do. His only comfort was that the goblins hadn't found his little sword. Fortunately, the goblins hadn't noticed it as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it, and it shone before his eyes.
So, it's an elvish blade too, and goblins aren't very near and yet not far enough. Go back, it's no good at all. Go sideways, impossible. Go forward, only thing to do. On we go.
So, on and on and on he went, until he was tireder than tired. The tunnel seemed to have no end. The sword was hardly shining at all, when suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into water.
Ugh!
Oh, it was icy cold, and pulled him up sharp and short. He seemed to have reached some kind of underground lake. And deep down here, by the dark water, lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. He lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake, and he had a little boat. He'd been watching Bilbo with his pale, lamp-like eyes, and now he got into his boat and shot off from the island. Suddenly, up he came close to Bilbo and whispered and hissed.
So bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At least it's a tasty morsel it'll make us, Gollum.
Who are you?
What is he, my precious?
I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know. If only I can get away.
So, perhaps he sits here and chats with it a bit, see, my precious. It likes riddles, perhaps it does it?
He was anxious to appear friendly until he found out more about the hobbit and the sword.
Very well.
I must have a competition with us, my precious. If precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eats it, my precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, then we does what it wants. Eh? We shows it the way out, yes.
You're all right.
Bilbo didn't dare to disagree, and was nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. They asked riddles and answered riddles, turn and turn about, until Gollum began to be angry and hungry. And he thought the time had come to ask something hard and horrible.
This thing all things devours. Birds, beasts, trees, flowers, gnaws iron, bites steel, grinds hard stones to meal, slays kings, ruins towns, and beats high mountains down.
Poor Bilbo had a feeling that he ought to know the answer, but he couldn't think of it. Gollum flapped into the water and paddled to the bank. Bilbo could see his eyes coming towards him. He wanted to shout, "Give me more time! Give me time!" But all that came out was,
Time! Time!
And he was saved by pure luck, for that, of course, was the answer. Gollum was disappointed. He sat down in the dark by Bilbo.
He's got to ask us a question, my precious. Yes. Just one more question to guess. Yes.
But Bilbo simply couldn't think of any question with that nasty, wet, cold thing sitting next to him. He pinched and slapped himself. He gripped on his little sword. He even felt in his pocket with his other hand. And there he found the ring he'd picked up in the passage and forgotten about.
What have I got in my pocket?
Oh, not fair, not fair. It isn't fair, my precious.
What have I got in my pocket?
Oh, son, it must give us 3 guesses, my precious. 3 guesses.
Very well, guess away.
Handses?
Wrong. Guess again.
The knife?
Wrong. Last guess. Come on, I'm waiting. Time's up.
String or nothing.
Both wrong.
Bilbo jumped at once to his feet, put his back to the wall, and held out his sword.
Well, what about your promise? I want to go. You must show me the way.
Gollum was angry now and very hungry, and already he had a plan. Not far away was his island, and there he kept one very beautiful thing, a ring, a golden ring, a precious ring.
It must wait, yes, it must. My precious, that's what we want now. Yes, we want it.
Gollum wanted it because it was a ring of power, and if you slipped that ring on your finger, you were invisible. Only in the full sunlight could you be seen, and then only by your shadow, and that would be shaky and faint. Perhaps even the master who ruled such rings couldn't have said how Gollum came by it.
Oh, it won't see us, will it, my precious? It won't see us, and its nasty little sword will be useless. Yes, quite.
That was what was in Gollum's wicked little mind as he went off into the dark. Suddenly, Bilbo heard a screech, sent a shiver down his back. Gollum was on his island, scrabbling here and there, searching and seeking in vain.
What's the matter? What have you lost?
Oh, it mustn't ask us. Not its business. No, Gollum. It's lost! Gollum! Gollum! Gollum!
Well, so am I, and I want to get unlost, so come along and let me out and then go on with your looking.
No, not yet, precious. We must search for it. It's lost, Gollum!
But you never guessed my last question.
Oh, never guessed. What has it got in its pockets? Oh, tell us that. It must tell first.
Answers were to be guessed, not given.
Oh, but it wasn't a fair question. Not a riddle, precious. No. What has it got in its pockets?
To his alarm, Bilbo now saw 2 small points of light peering at him, and they were coming swiftly nearer as Gollum paddled wildly back to the dark shore. Just in time, Bilbo turned and ran blindly back up the dark passage down which he'd come.
What has it got in its pockets?
Bilbo heard the hiss loud behind him.
What have I wonder?
He was beginning to guess himself. He put his left hand in his pocket. The ring felt very cold as it quietly slipped onto his groping forefinger. Suddenly, Bilbo struck his toes on a snag in the floor and fell flat. Before he could do anything, Gollum passed by, taking no notice of him. What could it mean? Gollum could see in the dark. Bilbo realized that. Painfully, he got up and very cautiously followed Gollum.
Oh, how did we lose it, my precious? Curse it! It slipped from us after all these ages and ages. It's gone, Gollum.
Suddenly, Gollum sat down and began to weep. Bilbo halted and flattened himself against the tunnel wall. After a while, Gollum stopped weeping and began to argue with himself.
The Baggins has got it in his pocket, sirs, but it doesn't know what it can do, does it? But it's tricksy. It knows a way in. It must know a way out. Yes, it's off to the back door, that's it. The goblins will catch it then. Gollum, goblins is. Yes, but if it's got the present, our precious present, then goblins will get it, Gollum. One of the goblins will put it on. And then no one will see him, and he'll come creepsy and tricksy and catch us. Gollum, Gollum. If the Baggins has gone that way, we must go quick and see.
With a spring, Gollum got up and shambled off at a great pace. Bilbo hurried after him, his head in a whirl of hope and wonder. It was hard to believe that he really had found a magic ring by accident. Still, there it was. On they went. At last, Gollum stopped by a low opening on their left.
Oh, this is it. This is the way to the back door. Yes, here's the passage. But we dursn't go in, precious. No, we dursn't. Goblins is down there. Curse them and crush them.
So they came to a dead stop. Bilbo crept away from the wall more quietly than a mouse, but Gollum stiffened at once and sniffed. Bilbo could sense that Gollum was tense as a bowstring gathered for a spring. Bilbo was desperate. He must fight. But he was invisible now, and Gollum had no sword. A sudden pity welled up in Bilbo's heart, and quite suddenly, in a flash, as if lifted by a new strength and resolve, he leapt. Straight over Gollum's head he jumped, and falling fair on his sturdy feet, sped off down the new tunnel. Behind him, faintly, Gollum's voice came.
Thief, 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 Baggins! We hates it, we hates it, we hates it forever.
Then there was silence. Gollum was defeated. Bilbo hurried on. The passage climbed steeply, then turned a corner. Bilbo turned another corner and came suddenly right into an open space where the light seemed to him dazzlingly bright. Really, it was only a leak of sunshine through a doorway where a great stone door was left standing open. And there were goblins. They saw Bilbo before he saw them. Now, whether it was an accident or a last trick of the ring before it took a new master, it wasn't on his finger. As they rushed at him, Bilbo found the ring still in his left pocket and slipped it on. He vanished. The goblins stopped short, cursing and swearing. In the disturbance, Bilbo had the sense to sneak his way round to the door. He tried to squeeze through the crack, and he stuck. His buttons had got wedged on the edge of the door and the doorpost. The sun came out from behind a cloud and shone bright on the outside of the door, but he couldn't get through. Suddenly, one of the goblins saw his shadow and shouted. Bilbo gave a terrific squirm. Buttons burst off in all directions, and he was through, leaping down stone steps like a goat and heading for some trees. The goblins didn't like the sun, and as they couldn't see Bilbo with the ring on, they soon gave up their chase. Bilbo had escaped. He wandered on and on until the sun began to sink westwards behind the mountains.
Good heavens, I seem to have got right to the other side of the misty mountains. But where, and oh, where can Gandalf and the dwarves have got to?
It was just at this moment that he heard voices. Dwarves' voices. He was still wearing the ring, so the lookout, Balin, didn't see him approach. As he got closer, he found he could hear Gandalf's voice too, and he had a thought.
I'll give them all a surprise.
Either you dwarves help me to look for Mr. Baggins, or I go and leave you here to get out of the mess as best you can yourselves. Now, whatever did you want to drop him for, Dory? Why didn't you pick him up again?
Oh, good heavens. Can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark. Then all of a sudden you gave one of your blinding flashes and shouted, "Follow me, everybody." We thought everybody had, till we dashed through the gate guards out of the lower door and helter-skelter down here. And here we are, without the burglar, confusticating.
And here is the burglar!
And Bilbo stepped down into the middle of them and slipped off the ring. His reputation went up a very great deal after this, and he had to sit down and tell them everything.
Except about the finding of the ring.
As he finished, Gandalf gave him an odd look from under his bushy eyebrows, and the hobbit wondered if he'd guessed at the part of the tale that he'd left out. But the wizard just called them all to their senses.
They'll be out after us in hundreds when night comes on. We must be miles on before dark. Let's get on.
Goodbye, until tomorrow. Gandalf had managed to lead the 13 dwarves out of the goblins' tunnels under the misty mountains. Bilbo too had escaped, had found the others and told them his story, all except about finding old Gollum's ring that made its wearer invisible. They were now some way to the north of the route they'd intended to take, and the goblins would be out after them in force as soon as night fell, so...
"Let's get on," said Gandalf.
They went on through the pine woods until it was dark. Then they came to an opening where no trees grew. All of a sudden, they heard a howl away downhill. It was answered by others to the right and left. It was wolves howling at the moon, wolves gathering together.
What should we do? What should we do? Bilbo cried. Escaping goblins to be caught by wolves.
Up into the trees, quick.
They ran to the trees at the edge of the glade, and up they went as high as ever they could. They were just in time, for the wolves were already trotting, howling into the clearing. This glade in the ring of trees was evidently a meeting place of the wargs, for so the evil wolves over the edge of the wild were named. More and more kept coming in. In no time, they'd smelled out the 5 trees that had anyone in them, and had left guards at the foot of each. The rest gathered round a great grey wolf seated in the middle of the glade. He spoke to them in the dreadful language of the wargs. Only Gandalf understood, and this is what he learned.
The goblins, it appeared, often got the wargs to help them on their raids for food and slaves. And such a raid was planned for this very night, against the homes of the brave men from the south who'd recently been settling in that region. Now the wargs thought we were friends of the woodmen, and were come to spy on them. But long before morning, they said, goblin soldiers would be coming down from the mountains, and goblins can climb trees or cut them down.
Well, Gandalf wasn't going to let the wolves have it all their own way. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of his tree. Then he set one alight with bright blue fire and threw it whizzing down among the circle of wolves. Then came another and another. Very soon, all about the glade, wolves were rolling over and over to put out the sparks on their backs, while those that were burning were running about howling and setting others alight.
"What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?" said the Lord of the Eagles on his lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains.
He summoned many other eagles to him, and they flew away from the mountains and down, down, down towards the ring of wolves and the meeting place of the goblins. The wolves that had caught fire and fled into the forest had set it alight in several places. But the wolf guards didn't leave the trees, maddened and angry though they were. Then suddenly goblins came running up, yelling. They soon learned what had happened and made a plan which seemed to them most amusing. They quickly stamped and beat out all the flames except those close to the trees where the travellers were hiding, and soon they had a ring of smoke and flame all round them. Then the goblins began dancing round in a circle and singing a horrible song. 15 birds in 5 fir trees, they sang, and roast 'em alive and stew 'em in a pot, fry them, boil them and eat them hot. And then they stopped, for at that moment the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized Gandalf in his talons and was gone. The great birds that were with him swept down too, and seized the dwarves who were scrambling up their trees now as far as ever they dared to go. Poor little Bilbo, who'd been sharing a tree with 5 of the dwarves, was very nearly left behind again. He just managed to catch hold of Dory's legs as Dory was borne off last of all, and up they went together, with Bilbo's arms nearly breaking. The goblins howled and the wolves yammered and gnashed their teeth in anger. The flight ended only just in time for Bilbo, just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell onto the rough platform of an eagle's eyrie.
Oh, now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it's suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork and put back on the shelf.
"Huh? No, you don't," he heard Dory answering, "because the bacon knows that it'll get back in the pan sooner or later, and it's to be hoped we shan't."
Now, it so happened that Gandalf and the Eagle Lord were on friendly terms, for Gandalf had once healed him from an arrow wound. Together, they decided that the eagles were to carry the dwarves and himself, and Bilbo, far away and set them down well on their journey across the plains below. But the Lord of the Eagles wouldn't take them anywhere near where men lived, in case the men shot at them thinking they were after sheep.
Very well, take a swear as far as you will. We're already deeply obliged to you, but in the meantime, we're famished with hunger.
I'm nearly dead of it.
The eagles brought up dry boughs for fuel and meat, and soon there was a fine roasting smell all around their great shelf of rock. And so ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. The next morning, the eagles flew the travellers many miles to a great rock, a hill of stone called the Carrock, that stood in the midst of the great river. There, the eagles set down their passengers and made their farewells. At the foot of the rock, our travellers gathered and discussed what was to be done. The dwarves and hobbit were dismayed when Gandalf told them that the time had come for him to leave them. Already he'd come further east than he'd intended. However,
I can give you a day or two more. We have no food and no luggage and no ponies to ride. But there is somebody that I know of who lives not far away, and we must go and find him.
Soon they were marching on their way to meet this somebody. As they walked, Gandalf told Bilbo more about him.
You must be careful not to annoy him. He can be appalling when he's angry, though he's kind enough if humoured.
The dwarves all gathered round when they heard this and started asking questions.
If you must know more, his name is Bjorn. He's very strong, and he's a skin changer.
What, a furrier?
Oh, gracious, Mr. Baggins. No. He is a skin changer. He changes his skin. Sometimes he's a huge black bear. Sometimes he's a great, strong, black-haired man. Now, as a man, he keeps cattle and horses which work for him and talk to him. He doesn't eat them. Neither does he hunt or eat wild animals. He lives mostly on cream and honey.
It was the middle of the afternoon when they came to a high thorn hedge through which you could neither see nor scramble.
You'd better wait here, and when I call or whistle, begin to come after me, but only in pairs, mind. About 5 minutes between each pair of you. Now, come on, Mr. Baggins.
And with that, he went off along the hedge, taking the frightened hobbit with him. They found a wooden gate, and inside a wide track leading to a cluster of wooden buildings. Some horses trotted up to them, and then galloped off to the buildings. Soon, Gandalf and the hobbit reached a courtyard, where they found a huge man leaning on a large axe. The horses were standing near him.
Here they are, said the man to the horses. They don't look dangerous. You can be off. Now, who are you, and what do you want?
I am Gandalf.
Never heard of him. And what's this little fellow?
That is Mr. Baggins, a hobbit of good family and unimpeachable reputation. I am a wizard, and I've heard of you, if you haven't heard of me.
Yes, and what do you want?
Well, to tell the truth, we're rather in need of help. I may say we've had rather a bad time with goblins in the mountains.
Oh, goblins, then you better come inside and tell your tale.
And Bjorn led them through a wide hall to a sort of veranda. Here they sat, while Gandalf began his tale and Bilbo listened.
I was coming over the mountains with a friend or two.
Or two? I can only see one, and a little one at that.
Well, to tell the truth, I didn't like to bother you with a lot of us until I found out if you were busy. I'll give a call, if I may.
So Gandalf gave a long, shrill whistle, and presently Thorin and Dorin came round the house by the garden path and stood bowing, introducing themselves.
1 or 3, you meant. I see. They're dwarves. I'm not over fond of dwarves, but if it's true you're enemies of goblins, and are not up to any mischief in my lands, what are you up to, by the way?
Gandalf explained that the dwarves were on their way to visit the land of their fathers, east, beyond Mirkwood. Then he got on with telling his story. He happened to mention several companions, and Bjorn interrupted.
Do you call 2 several?
Well, no, but they don't seem all to have come when I whistled.
Gandalf whistled again, but Nori and Ori were there almost before he'd stopped. And the wizard continued the tale, telling how the goblins had them all in the cave.
They came out and grabbed the hobbit and the dwarves and our troop of ponies.
A troop of ponies? Do you always call 6 a troop?
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, there were more than 6 ponies, for there were more than 6 of us. Oh, well, here are 2 more.
Just at that moment, Balin and Dwalin appeared and bowed low. By the time Gandalf had got to the part where the goblins were dancing round the burning fir trees, 10 of the dwarves had arrived.
The goblins yelled with delight and sang songs making fun of us. 15 birds in 5 fir trees.
Good heavens, look, don't pretend that goblins can't count. They can. 12 is not 15, and they know it.
And so do I. There were Bifur and Bofur as well. But here they are.
In came Bifur and Bofur, and Bomber, puffing up behind. He'd refused to wait the 5 minutes. Bjorn never invited people into his house if he could help it, but now, thanks to Gandalf's plan, there were 15 strangers sitting in his porch. Furthermore, Bjorn invited them all to stay, and so they had a supper or dinner such as they hadn't had since they left Rivendell and the last homely house. The next day, Bjorn was nowhere to be found, but the tracks of a great many bears led off from the woods near the house, west towards the mountains, towards the pine woods where the goblins and wargs had met. The following morning, the skin changer had returned. He and the true bears had cleared the woods of many goblins and wolves, and from captives had learned the whole of Gandalf's story was true, and that Gandalf had even killed the chief goblin.
I shall think more kindly of dwarves after this.
Now he was their friend. Bjorn promised to provide ponies for each of them, and a horse for Gandalf, for their journey to the forest of Mirkwood. And he'd give them food enough to last them for weeks, with care. Water, he said, they wouldn't need to carry this side of the forest, for there were streams and springs along the road.
But water is not easy to find in Mirkwood, nor food. There is one stream there, I know, which crosses the path. That you should neither drink of nor bathe in, for I've heard that it carries enchantment and a great drowsiness and forgetfulness. And I don't think you will shoot anything to eat, wholesome or unwholesome, without straying from the path, and that you must not do for any reason.
It was soon after midday that they rode off through Bjorn's gate. By his advice, their way now led to the north, where lay the gate of a little-known pathway through Mirkwood that would take them almost straight towards the lonely mountain. After 2 days' journey, they reached the edge of Mirkwood, and the time to say farewell to Gandalf.
Don't stray off the track. If you do, it's 1,000 to 1 you'll never find it again and never get out of Mirkwood.
Do we really have to go through?
Yes, you do, if you want to get to the other side. Now, I'm not going to allow you to back out now, Mr. Baggins.
Oh, no. I meant, is there no way round?
But there was no safe path, and to travel round would be to add 200 miles or more to their journey. This didn't please Thorin.
Very comforting you are, to be sure. Goodbye. If you won't come with us, you'd better get off without any more talk.
Goodbye, then, and really goodbye.
Gandalf turned his horse and rode down into the west after the ponies, for Bjorn had no wish for any of his animals to enter Mirkwood. Before Gandalf passed quite out of hearing, they heard his voice come faintly.
Goodbye. Be good. Take care of yourselves. And don't leave the path.
Then he galloped away and was soon lost to sight. Now began the most dangerous part of all the journey. They each shouldered their heavy packs and turned from the light that lay on the lands outside and plunged into the forest. Goodbye, until tomorrow. Bilbo had escaped from the goblin tunnels where he'd found Gollum's magic ring and met up with Gandalf and the 13 dwarves, only to be surrounded by wolves. The Lord of the Eagles and his followers had rescued them all and set them well on their way to the house of Bjorn, the skin changer. He'd provided them with food and water skins and ponies to take them as far as the edge of Mirkwood. There, Gandalf had left them, and as he went, his voice had come faintly to them.
Goodbye. Be good, take care of yourselves, and don't leave the path.
Then he galloped away and was soon lost to sight. Each dwarf and the hobbit shouldered their heavy pack and waterskin and plunged into the forest. As their eyes became used to the dimness, they could see just a little way to either side in a sort of darkened green glimmer. It wasn't long before they began to hate the forest, and the nights were the worst. As they took it in turns to watch, they'd be surrounded by eyes.
Not animal eyes. Insect eyes. Only they're much too big.
All this went on for what seemed to the hobbit ages and ages. Their provisions were already getting low when they found their path blocked by running water. This was the river that Bjorn had warned them of, that carried with it drowsiness and forgetfulness. They found a small boat moored there, and they were able to use that to ferry themselves across the water. All went well until the final trip. Dwalin had just scrambled out of the boat, and fat old Bomber was getting ready to follow, when out of the gloom came suddenly the shape of a flying deer. High it sprang and cleared the water with a mighty leap. Bomber had only 1 foot on the bank when the deer bore down on him, and he stumbled and toppled into the dark water. By the time the dwarves got a rope to him and had laid him on the bank, Bomber was fast asleep, and fast asleep he remained in spite of all they could do. Gloom gathered over the travellers, and gathered still deeper in the following days, and now they were burdened with the heavy body of Bomber. After 6 more days, their provisions had run out, and their only scrap of comfort came unexpectedly when Bomber woke up, very hungry and thirsty. But there was nothing to be done but to tighten their belts round their empty stomachs and trudge along the track, without any great hope of getting to its end before they died of starvation. On they trudged all day, until Bomber suddenly refused to go a step further and flung himself down on the ground. At that very moment, Balin spotted a twinkle of light ahead of them in the forest. It seemed plain that torches and fires were burning under the trees, only a good way off their track. But they remembered the warning not to stray off the path.
A feast would be no good if we never got back alive from it, said Thorin.
But without a feast, we shan't remain alive much longer anyway, said Bomber.
They argued about it for a long while, but in the end, they all agreed to leave the path, and they plunged into the forest together. After a good deal of creeping and crawling, they reached a clearing where there were many people, elvish-looking folk, laughing merrily, and they were eating and drinking. Without waiting to consult one another, every one of them got up and scrambled forwards into the ring of light with the one idea of begging for some food. No sooner had the first stepped into the clearing than all the torches and the great fires went out as if by magic. They were completely lost in the lightless dark. By the time they'd managed to gather themselves together again, of course, they were all hopelessly lost. Then Dory saw some more lights. This time, it was Thorin alone who stepped into the midst of the elves. Out went all the lights, and the darkness was filled again with the dwarves' clamour. Bilbo found himself running round and round, as he thought, and calling,
Dory! Nori! Ori! Oin! Gloin! Philly! Killy! Bomber! Bofer! Dwalin! Balin! Thorin Oakenshield!
But their cries got steadily further and fainter, and though after a while it seemed to him they changed to yells and cries for help in the far distance, all noise at last died right away, and he was left alone in complete silence and darkness. He soon made up his mind that it was no good trying to do anything more till day came, so he sat himself down, and not for the last time, fell to thinking of his far-distant hobbit-hole. He felt something touch him, something like strong, sticky string, and when he tried to move, he found that his legs were wrapped in the same stuff. Then the great spider, who'd been busy tying him up while he dozed, came at him from behind. He drew his sword, and the spider jumped back, giving him time to cut his legs loose. After that, it was his turn to attack. He struck it with his sword, right in the eyes, and killed it with another stroke. And then he fell down and remembered nothing more for a long while. There was the usual dim grey light of the forest day about him when he came to his senses. Somehow, and in spite of his empty stomach, the killing of the giant spider made him feel much fiercer and bolder. As he wiped his stained sword, he said to himself,
I will give you a name, and I shall call you Sting.
After that, and not daring to shout, he set out to look for his friends. By luck, and he was born with a good share of it, he guessed more or less the right direction, and as he crept along, he slipped on his magic ring, and that is why the spiders neither saw nor heard him coming. He noticed a place of dense black shadow ahead of him, and as he drew nearer, he saw that it was made by great spiders' webs, tangled one with another. And suddenly he saw, too, that there were spiders, huge and horrible, sitting in the branches above him. As he stood and watched them, he realized they were talking to one another, and talking about the dwarves.
Kill 'em, I say. Kill 'em now, and hang 'em dead for a while. They're dead now, I warrant. That they're not. I saw one struggling just now. I'll show you.
With that, one of the fat spiders ran along a rope till it came to the fattest of a dozen bundles hanging in a row from a high branch.
That's poor old Bomber, I'll bet.
And it nipped hard at the dwarvish nose that stuck out. There was a muffled yelp inside, and a toe shot up and kicked the spider straight and hard.
You were quite right. The meat's alive and kicking. I'll soon put a stop to that.
Now, Bilbo was a pretty fair shot with a stone, and it didn't take him long to find one that fitted his hand easily. The stone struck the spider plunk on the head, and it dropped senseless off the tree with all its legs curled up. The next stone went whizzing through a big web, taking off the spider sitting in the middle of it. Whack! Dead. After that, the spiders forgot the dwarves for a bit, I can tell you. They couldn't see Bilbo, but they could make a good guess at the direction from which the stones were coming. The idea came to Bilbo to lead the furious spiders further and further away from the dwarves. Dancing among the trees, he began to sing a song to infuriate them, and to bring them all after him, and also to let the dwarves hear his voice.
Oh, fat spider spinning in a tree. Oh, fat spider can't see me. At a cop, won't you stop? Stop your spinning and look for me.
Not very good, perhaps, but it did what he wanted. Practically all the spiders followed him into the forest until he'd gone as far as he dared. Then, quieter than a mouse, he stole back. He had precious little time to rescue the dwarves before the spiders returned, but somehow he managed to scramble up to the long branch where the bundles were hanging and to kill the old, slow, wicked spider guarding the prisoners. Wriggling along the branch, he reached the first bundle.
Most likely Philly, he thought, by the tip of a long nose poking out of the winding threads.
Using his sword, he managed to cut Feely free and help him onto the branch. There he did his best to help the dwarf, although Feely was feeling very sick and ill from spider poison. None of the other dwarves were better off than Feely, and some of them were worse. They managed to release 6 of the dwarves, but poor old Bomber was so exhausted that he just fell onto the ground, fortunately onto leaves. But there were still 5 dwarves hanging at the end of the branch when the spiders began to come back, more full of rage than ever. Bilbo fought off those that crawled up the tree trunk. He'd taken off his ring when he rescued Feely, so now the spiders could see their tormentor, and they all began to splutter and hiss threats at him. While the dwarves were releasing the other captives, Bilbo noticed that some of the spiders had gathered round old Bomber on the floor. He slashed at the spiders in front of him and scrambled down the tree, right into the middle of those on the ground. 6 of them were killed before the rest drew off and left Bomber to Bilbo.
Come down! Don't stay up there and be netted!
Bilbo could see spiders crawling along the boughs above the heads of the dwarves. Down the dwarfs scrambled, and there they were at last, 12 of them, counting Bomber. And then the battle began. They beat off the spiders again and again, but it couldn't go on forever. Poor Bilbo couldn't think of any plan except to let the dwarves into the secret of the ring.
I'm going to disappear. I'll draw the spiders off if I can, and you must make in the opposite direction. To the left there, that's more or less the way towards the place where we last saw the elf fires.
And the plan almost worked. But although some of the spiders did follow Bilbo, others followed the dwarves, weak and sick as they were. Things looked pretty bad again when suddenly Bilbo reappeared and charged into the spiders unexpectedly from the side. It was a most terrible business and seemed to take hours. But at last, just when Bilbo felt that he couldn't lift his hand for a single stroke more, the spiders suddenly gave it up and went back disappointed to their colony. The dwarves then noticed that they'd come to the edge of a ring where the elf fires had been, and it seemed that some good magic lingered there, which the spiders didn't like. As the dwarves rested and drew breath, they had to have Bilbo's vanishing business explained to them most carefully, and they began to have a great respect for Mr. Baggins. All of a sudden, Dwalin looked round at them.
Where's Thorin?
It was a terrible shock. Of course, there were only 13 of them, 12 dwarves and the hobbit. And there, in the forest, we must leave them for the present. When Thorin had stepped forward into the circle of light, he'd fallen like a stone enchanted into sleep as the lights went out. The wood elves bound him and carried him away. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. Now, they weren't wicked folk, but they were less wise than the high elves of the west. Still, elves they were and remain, and that is good people. In a great cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood on its eastern side, there lived at this time their greatest king. The cave was his palace, and it was also the dungeon of his prisoners. So, to the caves the elves dragged Thorin. There had long been trouble between the wood elves and some dwarves, which had started because of the elven king's weakness for gold and jewels. Thorin's family had had nothing to do with that old quarrel, and consequently, when they took their spell off him, he was angry at their treatment of him, and was determined to say nothing of his own quest for treasure. The king asked many stern questions of Thorin, but he'd only say that he was starving.
And what brought you and your companions to the forest at all?
At that, Thorin shut his mouth and wouldn't say another word.
Very well. Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth.
Then the elves shut Thorin in one of their inmost caves with strong wooden doors and left him. There, in the dungeon, poor Thorin lay, and he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It wasn't very long before he discovered. But that belongs to the beginning of another adventure, which we'll tell you about next week. Goodbye, until then. Gandalf the wizard had persuaded Bilbo Baggins, the hobbit of Bag End Hobbiton, to join Thorin Oakenshield and his party of dwarves on their quest to reach the Lonely Mountain. There, Thorin's grandfather, Thrall, had been king until Smaug the dragon had killed or driven out all the dwarves and taken their treasure for himself. That had happened many years earlier. Bilbo's journey had started late in April. It was now late in the summer, and after many adventures, which included Gandalf killing the great goblin in the caves of the Misty Mountains, and Bilbo finding the ring of power that made its wearer invisible, Gandalf had left the others as they entered the forest of Mirkwood. There, the travellers had run out of food, left the elf path, had been attacked by giant spiders, and had lost their leader, Thorin. He'd been captured by wood elves, good folk, but untrusting of strangers, and with a king whose weakness was his greed for treasure. Knowing this, Thorin had said nothing of his quest, and was now locked deep in the Elf King's dungeons. The day after the battle with the spiders, Bilbo and the dwarves made one last despairing effort to find again the path before they died of hunger and thirst. But the light was already fading, when suddenly, all round them, out leapt wood elves with bows and spears. There was no thought of a fight by the exhausted dwarves, but Bilbo popped on his ring and disappeared. And that's why, when the elves bound and counted the dwarves, they never found or counted the hobbit. Bilbo followed the party to the Elven King's caves, and, still unnoticed, crossed with them the bridge that led across the river outside the king's door. Long and searchingly, though the Elven King questioned the dwarves, he got little more out of them than out of Thorin. They were surly and angry at their treatment, and Dwalin spoke for them all.
What have we done, O king? Is it a crime to be lost in the forest? Are the spiders your tame beasts or pets, if killing them makes you angry?
It is a crime to wander in my realm without leave. After all the disturbance you have made, I have a right to know what brings you here. And if you will not tell me now, I will keep you all in prison until you've learned sense and manners.
Then the king ordered the dwarves each to be put in a separate cell and to be given food and drink. For 2 weeks Bilbo picked a sort of living by stealing food, never daring to take off his ring and hardly daring to sleep.
I'm like a burglar that can't get away. I wish I was back in my hobbit-hole by my own fireside with the lamp shining.
Eventually, by watching and following the guards, Bilbo managed to find all the dwarves, including, to his surprise and joy, Thorin. Now Thorin took heart and passed a message by Bilbo to the others, that no one was to reveal their errand to the king.
Not until the remarkable Mr. Invisible Baggins has altogether failed to think of something clever.
Bilbo, however, didn't feel nearly so hopeful as Thorin. But he did rescue his friends, and this is how it happened. One day, he discovered that there was another entrance to the elvish caves. A stream flowed deep underground and joined the forest river some way further to the east. At one point, the tunnel roof had been cut away and covered with great oaken trapdoors, which opened into the king's cellars. And there stood barrels and barrels and barrels of wine and foodstuffs, all brought for the elves from the south. Bilbo learned how the wine and other goods came first to the Long Lake, where there was a town built out on bridges far into the water. From Lake Town, the barrels were brought up the forest river, and when they were empty, the elves cast them through the trapdoors, and out the barrels floated through a water gate where the stream came forth from the hillside. For some time, Bilbo sat and thought, and at last he had the desperate beginnings of an escape plan. The evening meal had just been taken to the prisoners when Bilbo heard the king's butler bidding the chief of guards good night.
Now, come with me, said the butler, and taste the new wine that's just come in. I shall be hard at work tonight clearing the cellars of the empty wood, so let's have a drink first to help the labour.
The chief of the guards was more than willing, and off they went. Bilbo was all in a flutter, for he saw that he had a chance at once to try his desperate plan. He followed the two elves until they entered a small cellar and sat down at a table on which 2 large flagons were set. They began to drink and laugh merrily. But this heady wine was meant for smaller bowls than the butler's great flagons, and very soon both the elves had fallen fast asleep. In crept the hobbit and took the guard's keys. Then, carefully locking their cell doors behind them, he released all the dwarves. They met no guards, for nearly all the king's folk were merrymaking at a great autumn feast that night. Bilbo explained his idea, but as he feared, the dwarves, especially Thorin, didn't like it a bit.
Oh, we shall be bruised and battered to pieces and drowned too, for certain. This is a bad idea.
Oh, very well. Come along, back to your nice cells, and I'll lock you all in again, and you can sit there comfortably and think of a better plan.
That was too much for them, and following the hobbit, down into the lowest cellars they crept. As they passed the butler's door, Bilbo kind-heartedly put the keys back on the guard's belt.
Yes, that'll save him some of the trouble he's in for. It'll puzzle them all, too. They'll think we had a very strong magic to pass through all those locked doors and disappear.
Quickly the dwarves found 13 barrels with room enough for a dwarf each. At last, Bilbo had them all safely stowed, and not a bit too soon. Only a minute or two after the last lid had been fitted on the last barrel, there came the sound of voices and the flicker of lights. A number of elves had left the merry feast above. They woke the butler, and with much merriment opened the trapdoors and helped him in his task. Down, smacking into the water, all the barrels went, jostling against the walls of the tunnel and bobbing away down the current. It was just at this moment that Bilbo suddenly discovered the weak point in his plan. Most likely you saw it some time ago. Of course, he was not in a barrel himself, and now the very last one was being rolled to the doors. Not knowing what else to do, poor little Bilbo caught hold of it and was pushed over the edge with it. Down into the water he fell, with the barrel on top of him. He came up again, spluttering and clinging to the wood like a rat. The barrels bobbed along to the water gate which the elves above had opened. The mass of tubs and casks passed out of the caves and into the open stream.
Oh, I do hope I put the lids on tight enough.
But before long, Bilbo was worrying too much about himself to remember the dwarves. He managed to keep his head above the water, but he was wondering if he would die now of cold. But as the stream joined the main water of the forest river, it swept the barrels and casks to the north bank, where elves on lookout quickly counted them and roped them together into a great raft, which they left moored there until morning. Bilbo waded ashore and managed to steal himself a little food from some huts there, and then, wet as he was, he managed to sleep a little in a pile of leaves. He woke with a loud sneeze. It was already grey morning, but luck was still with him as he scrambled onto the raft without being noticed, just as it moved off and began its journey down towards the lake. The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along, and after a while the trees ended and the river wandered in 100 winding courses through marshes and pools. And far away there loomed the mountain, the lonely mountain. Bilbo had come far to see it, and now he didn't like the look of it in the least. As he listened to the talk of the raft elves, he soon realized that he was fortunate ever to have seen it at all. He began to understand that all the roads and paths out of the east towards Mirkwood had in recent years vanished or fallen into disuse. Bilbo had in the end come by the only road that was any good. The sun had set when the river swept the raft into the long lake itself, and not far from the mouth of the forest river was the strange town he'd heard the elves speak of in the king's cellars. A great bridge made of wood ran out to where, on huge piles made of forest trees, was built a busy wooden town. Men there throve on trade from the south, and remembered little of the great days of Dale, the ruins of which lay north almost in the shadow of the mountain. But some people still sang old songs of the dwarf king under the mountain, and of the coming of the dragon. Some sang, too, that Thror and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers. But this pleasant legend didn't much affect their daily business. The elves moored the raft not far from the shoreward head of the great bridge that joined the town to the land. Then they went to join the feast of the master of the town. Bilbo cut loose first one barrel, then another, and pushed them to the shore and released the 13 dwarves. They were all more or less stiff, sore and soaked. Some were half drowned or sick with hunger, or could barely stand. But they were all alive, and Thorin said,
Well, here we are, and I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we're fed and recovered. In the meanwhile, what next?
Well, I suggest Lake Town. What else is there?
Thorin, the hobbit, and the two youngest and fittest dwarves, Feely and Keely, went along the shore to the great bridge. The guards there were drinking and laughing by a fire in their hut, and their astonishment was enormous when Thorin Oakenshield stepped in through the door and demanded to be taken to the master of the town. Soon, dwarves and hobbit were escorted across the bridge to the great hall where the master of Lake Town was feasting. From the door, and before the guards could utter a word, Thorin spoke.
I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain. I return.
The master sprang from his great chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the raft elves. One of them cried out that the dwarves were prisoners of their king and had escaped.
Is this true? Asked the master.
It is true that we were wrongfully waylaid by the elven king and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land. But I speak to the master of the town, not the raftman of the king.
Then the master hesitated. He wished for no enmity with the elven king, nor did he think much of the old songs and legends. But the news spread like fire through all the town, and some began to sing snatches of the old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain, and there was much shouting as well as music. As for the master, he saw there was nothing else for it but to obey the general clamour, for the moment at any rate. The other dwarves were brought into the town, and doctored and fed and housed and pampered in the most satisfactory way. Indeed, within a week they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine cloth of their proper colours, with beards combed and trimmed. All the dwarves drank Bilbo's health and made a great fuss of him, which was just as well, for he wasn't feeling particularly cheerful. He hadn't forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon, and he had, besides, a shocking cold. Even after 3 days, his speeches at banquets were limited to,
Thank you very much.
In the meanwhile, the wood elves had gone back up the forest river with their new cargoes. The elven king guessed much of his prisoner's escape plan, and now thought he knew the dwarf's errand. He said to himself,
Yes, very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter. But I expect they'll all come to a bad end and serve them right.
At the end of a fortnight, Thorin began to think of departure from Lake Town. The master wasn't sorry to let them go. Their arrival had turned things into a long holiday, in which business was at a standstill.
Let them go and bother Smaug and see how he welcomes them, was what he thought. Certainly, O Thorin, Thrain's son, Thror's son, was what he said. You must claim your own. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust to your gratitude when your kingdom is regained.
So, one day, 3 large boats left Lake Town laden with rowers, dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north, up the lake on the last stage of their long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo. Until tomorrow, goodbye. Bilbo Baggins had used his magic ring to help Thorin Oakenshield and the other 12 dwarves to escape from the dungeons of the King of the Wood Elves. In barrels, they'd floated down the forest river to Lake Town, where they'd been given a warm welcome. Now, they were on their way north, up the long lake towards the tall and grim Lonely Mountain, ancient home of the dwarves, before the coming of the mighty dragon Smaug. By the end of the 3rd day, the men of Lake Town had rowed out of the lake and far up the river running, which sprang out of the Lonely Mountain through the dwarves' great gate. The travellers disembarked and were joined by the horses with other provisions and some ponies that had been sent to meet them by the citizens of Lake Town. They packed what they could onto the ponies, and the rest was made into a store under a tent. None of the men of the town would stay so near the shadow of the mountain, and they made off swiftly down the river, even though night was already drawing on. The next day, dwarves and hobbit set off again. It was a weary journey, for they were coming into the scorched and barren lands of the desolation of Smaug. Now, according to the map made by Thror, Thorin's grandfather, the secret door lay somewhere on the western side of the mountain. The runes said,
5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast.
And the moon letters found by Elrond added,
Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole.
The first day of the dwarves' new year, which fell on the first day of the last moon of autumn, was called Durin's Day, when the new moon and the sun were both in the sky together. But the dwarves had no way of foretelling when such a thing would happen. Thorin sent Balin with a scouting expedition to spy out the front gate. But all about the cavernous opening was the reek and stench of the dragon, so that way was closed to them, and they were as far as ever, it seemed, from the end of their quest. But Mr. Baggins had more spirit than the others. It was he that made the dwarves move their camp and begin the dangerous search on the western slopes of the mountain. It was Bilbo, too, who, with Fili and Kili, found the narrow track, half lost, half hidden, winding up to a little steep-walled bay, invisible from their camp at the foot of the cliff below it. At the inner end of the bay was a flat wall as smooth and upright as any mason's work, but without any sign of threshold or bolt or keyhole. Yet they didn't doubt that they'd found the door at last. That night there was excitement in the camp, and in the morning they prepared to move once more. Only Bofa and Bomba were left behind to guard the ponies and the stores. The others went up the newly found path, along the narrow, breathless ledge to the little grassy bay. There they made their camp, hauling up what they needed from below with their ropes. They brought picks and tools of many sorts from Lake Town, but they quickly found that mining work was no good against the magic that had shut this door, and they grew terrified, too, of the echoing noise. There was nothing to do but sit and think, or wander aimlessly about, and glummer they all became. A large grey stone lay in the centre of the grass, and Bilbo stared moodily at it, or watched the great snails that seemed to love the little shut-in bay. One day, Thorin said,
Tomorrow begins the last week of autumn. And what is our burglar doing for us?
Bilbo heard this, and that night his thoughts were troubled. But all next day he had an odd feeling that he was waiting for something.
Perhaps the wizard will suddenly come back today.
It was late in the afternoon. As the orange ball of the sun was sinking westward towards the level of his eyes, Bilbo noticed, pale and faint, a thin new moon above the rim of the earth. At that very moment he heard a sharp crack behind him. There, on the grey stone, was an enormous thrush. It had caught a snail and was knocking it on the stone. Crack! Suddenly, Bilbo understood. Forgetting all danger, he hailed the dwarves, shouting and waving. They came running towards him, and quickly Bilbo explained. They all fell silent. The sun sank lower into a belt of reddened cloud and disappeared. Then suddenly, a red ray of the sun escaped like a finger through a rent in the cloud and fell on the smooth rock face. The old thrush gave a sudden trill. There was a loud crack, and a hole appeared in the wall about 3 feet from the ground.
The key! The key, Thorin! The key that went with the map! Try it now while there's still time.
Then Thorin stepped up and drew the key on its chain from round his neck. It fitted in the hole and it turned. Snap! Now they pushed, and slowly a door 5 feet high and 3 broad swung inwards. For a long time the dwarves debated, until at last Thorin spoke.
Now is the time for our esteemed Mr. Baggins, a hobbit full of courage and resource far exceeding his size, to earn his reward.
I have got you out of 2 messes already, so I am, I think, already owed some reward. But 3rd time pays for all, and somehow I think I will go and have a peep at once and get it over.
The stars were coming out as the hobbit crept through the enchanted door. After a while, where he could still see the faint outline of the door, the hobbit slipped on the ring, and trembling by now with fear, crept noiselessly down, down, down into the dark.
Now you're for it at last, Bilbo Baggins. If only I could wake up and find this beastly tunnel was my own front hall at home.
He didn't wake up, of course, and soon he thought it was beginning to feel warm. A sound, too, began to throb in his ears, which grew to the unmistakable gurgling noise of some vast animal snoring in its sleep down there in front of him. Going on was one of the bravest things Bilbo ever did. There before him lay the end of the tunnel and the great bottommost cellar of the ancient dwarves. It was almost dark, so that its vastness could only be dimly guessed, but rising from the near side of the rocky floor, there was a great glow. The glow of Smaug. There he lay, a vast red golden dragon, fast asleep, his fires low in slumber. Beneath him and about him on all sides lay countless piles of precious things, gold, wrought and unwrought, gems and jewels and silver. Bilbo stole across the floor to the nearest of the mounds of treasure and grasped a great 2-handled cup as heavy as he could carry. Then he fled, but the dragon didn't wake, not yet. The dwarves were overjoyed to see Bilbo again, and though it was past midnight, they were still passing the cup from hand to hand, when suddenly a vast rumbling woke in the mountain underneath. Dragons may not have much real use for all their wealth, but they know it to an ounce as a rule, especially after long, long possession, and Smaug was no exception. He'd passed from an uneasy dream to a doze, and from a doze to wide waking. There was a breath of strange air in his cave. Could it be a draught from that little hole? He stirred and stretched forth his neck to sniff, and then he missed the cup.
Thieves! Fire! Murder!
His rage passed description. Roaring like thunder underground, he sped from his deep lair and up towards the front gate. The dwarves would all have been killed if it hadn't been for Bilbo again.
Quick! Quick, the door of the tunnel! It's no good here!
There was just time to haul up Bomber on watch at the lower camp and some stores before Smaug came hurtling from the north. His hot breath drove in through the crack they'd left in the doorway and scorched them as they lay hid. Then darkness fell as he passed again. The ponies screamed with terror, burst their ropes and galloped wildly off. The dragon swooped and turned to pursue them.
That'll be the end of our poor beasts.
The door withstood Smaug's searching eye, but he guessed from the ponies that men had come up from the river and the lake. Long he hunted in vain, till the dawn chilled his wrath, and he went back to his golden couch. The dwarves debated on what was to be done, and finally Bilbo volunteered to use his ring again and creep down and see what Smaug was up to. The dragon looked fast asleep when Bilbo peeped once more from the tunnel entrance, but he was only pretending. Hurriedly, Bilbo stepped back and blessed the luck of his ring, and then Smaug spoke.
Well, thief, I smell you and I feel your air. I hear your breath. Come along. Help yourself again. There's plenty and to spare.
No, thank you, oh Smaug, the tremendous. I didn't come for presents. I only wished to have a look at you and see if you were truly as great as tales say.
You have nice manners for a thief and a liar. Who are you and where do you come from, may I ask?
Oh, you may indeed. I come from under the hill, and under the hills and over the hills my paths led. I am the friend of bears and the guest of eagles. I am ring winner and luck wearer, and I am barrel rider.
This, of course, is the proper way to talk to dragons, if you don't want to reveal your proper name and don't want to infuriate them.
Very well, oh battle rider.
Maybe Beryl was your pony's name, and maybe not, though it was fat enough. In return for the excellent meal last night, let me give you one piece of advice for your good. Don't have any more to do with dwarves than you can help.
Dwarves?
I know the smell and taste of dwarf. No one better. Don't tell me that I can eat a dwarf-ridden pony and not know it. I suppose you got a fair price for that cup last night? Come now, did you? Nothing at all. Well, that's just like them. And I suppose your job is to get what you can when I'm not looking for them. And you'll get a fair share? Don't you believe it? If you get off alive, you'll be lucky.
You don't know everything, O Smaug the Mighty. Not gold alone brought us hither.
Why not say us 14 and be done with it? I don't know if it has occurred to you that even if you could steal the gold bit by bit, a matter of 100 years or so, you couldn't get it very far. Had you never thought of the catch? A 14th share, I suppose. Those were the terms, eh? And what about cartage? What about armed guards and trolls?
You'll hardly believe it, but poor Bilbo was really very taken aback. He'd never thought how the treasure was to be removed, certainly never how any part of it was to be brought back all the way to Bag End under Hill. But Bilbo made an effort to remain loyal to his friends.
I tell you that gold was only an afterthought with us. We came over hill and under hill by wave and wind for revenge!
Revenge? The king under the mountain is dead, and where are his kin that dare seek revenge? I laid low the warriors of old, and their like is not in the world today. Then I was but young and tender. Now I am old and strong thief in the shadows. My armor is like tenfold shields, my teeth are swords, my claws are spears, my wings a hurricane, and my breath death.
I always understood that dragons were softer underneath, but doubtless one so fortified has thought of that.
Your information is antiquated. I am armoured above and below with iron scales and hard gems. No blade can pierce me.
I might have guessed it. Truly there can be nowhere found the equal of Lord Smaug the Impenetrable. What magnificence to possess a waistcoat of fine diamonds!
Smaug was absurdly pleased, and he even rolled over.
Look, what do you say to that?
Dazzlingly marvellous, perfect, flawless, staggering! The old fool, why there's a large patch in the hollow of his left breast as bare as a snail out of its shell. Well, I really mustn't detain your magnificence any longer, or keep you from your much-needed rest. Ponies take some catching, I believe, and so do burglars!
That was an unfortunate remark, for as Bilbo fled up the tunnel, the dragon spouted terrific flames after him, and he was nearly overcome. Bilbo had been feeling rather pleased with the cleverness of his conversation with Smaug, but this mistake shook him into better sense.
Never laugh at live dragons, Bilbo, you fool.
That became a favourite saying of his later.
You aren't nearly through with this adventure yet.
And that was pretty true as well, as you'll see tomorrow. Goodbye, till then. Thorin and company had reached the lonely mountain, and had been on hand when, with the last light of Durin's day, the secret door had been revealed. Bilbo had entered and had found the great dragon Smaug lying asleep on his golden hoard. The hobbit had stolen a great gold cup, and this had aroused the dragon's wrath. Smaug had caught and eaten the dwarf's ponies, but he'd not yet found the magic door. On his second visit, Bilbo had talked to the dragon. Again he escaped, scorched but whole. As Bilbo came out of the tunnel, he stumbled and fell faint on the doorstep. When the dwarves had revived him, he became worried and uncomfortable. He had a nasty feeling that the dragon had guessed too much from his riddles. But Balin was anxious to comfort him.
Well, it cannot be helped, and it may be a blessing yet to know of the bare patch in the old worm's waistcoat.
All the while they talked, the old thrush, the one Bilbo had noticed first on the afternoon when the door was revealed, listened with his head cocked on one side. He reminded Thorin of the stories of the breed of thrushes that once lived near that mountain.
They were a long-lived and magical race, and the men of Dale used to have the trick of understanding their language.
This old bird flew away only when Bilbo had quite finished his story. Now, as darkness fell, the hobbit persuaded the dwarves to take shelter in the tunnel, for he was certain that Smaug would soon emerge again. For a longish while the company sat inside and went on talking about the dragon's wicked words, and how he'd said that the dwarves intended to cheat the hobbit. But Thorin settled that.
As for your share, I assure you we're more than grateful, and you shall choose your own 14th share as soon as we have anything to divide. And we'll take our share of the cost of transport when the time comes.
From that, the talk turned to the great hoard itself, and the fairest jewel of all, the Arkenstone of Thrain.
It was like a globe with 1,000 faces. It shone like silver in the firelight, like water in the sun, like snow under the stars, like rain upon the moon.
But even as Thorin spoke, Bilbo's fear deepened. He persuaded the dwarves to shut the door. It closed with a snap and a clang, and not a moment too soon. A great blow smote the side of the mountain. The walls cracked and stones fell from the roof onto their heads. Smaug had left his lair in silent stealth in the hopes of catching unawares something or somebody. And this was the outburst of his wrath when he could find nobody and see nothing. But after he'd let off his rage, he had further vengeance to take.
Barrel Rider, I don't know your smell, but if you're not one of those men of the lake, you had their help. They shall see me and remember who is the real king under the mountain.
And Smaug rose in fire and went away south towards the running river. In the meanwhile, the dwarves sat in darkness. Neither key nor magic would ever open the ruined door again.
We're trapped. This is the end. We shall die here.
Come, come, while there's life, there's hope. I'm going down the tunnel once more, and this time I think you'd better all come with me.
In desperation, they agreed, and together they found Smaug's treasure chamber, dark and empty. But it was Bilbo alone who called for a torch and explored the great mound of treasure. So it was he who found the gleaming Arkenstone lying at the top of the great pile. Bilbo halted, stooped to its enchantment, and lifted it.
Now I'm a burglar indeed. The dwarfs did say I could pick and choose my own share, and I think I'd choose this if they took all the rest.
All the same, Bilbo had an uncomfortable feeling that trouble would come from this picking and choosing. Now he went on again, down the other side of the great mound, and still there was no sight nor sound of Smaug. At last, the dwarves were sure it was safe for them to emerge from the passageway, and soon they were scattered around the vast chamber, exclaiming over this or that ancient treasure. They took weapons and mail from the hoard and armed themselves. To Bilbo, Thorin gave a small coat of mail, wrought for some elf prince long ago. It was of silver steel, which the elves call mithril, and a light helm of leather and steel was set on the hobbit's head.
I feel magnificent, but I expect I look rather absurd. Still, I wish there was a looking-glass handy.
All the same, long before the dwarves were tired of examining the treasures, Bilbo began to wonder nervously what the end of it all would be.
Thorin, what next? We aren't looking for gold, but for a way of escape, and we've tempted luck too long.
The dwarves agreed, and Thorin led them through the gaping doors, up long stairs, and along wide, echoing ways, until Bilbo was feeling he could go on no longer. And then a sound of water fell upon their ears.
There is the birth of the running river. From here it hastens to the gate. Let us follow it.
And soon the dwarves were standing in the broad light of day, looking out upon Dale.
It seems to be late morning, so I suppose it's more or less breakfast time, if there's any breakfast to have. And I don't feel that Smaug's front doorstep is the safest place for a meal.
Yes, quite right. We ought to make for the old lookout post at the southwest corner of the mountain. It'll be rough going. 5 hours' march, I should think.
However, they did stop briefly in the shelter of some rocks for some cram and water. Cram was made by the lakemen for long journeys. It's biscuitish, keeps good indefinitely, and it's very uninteresting, except as a chewing exercise. Later, in the rock chamber of the lookout post, they laid their burdens and discussed their plans. They could see no sign of the dragon, nor of any danger. Only to the south there was a great gathering of birds. But the dwarves were no nearer understanding that when the first cold stars came out. Now, if you wish, like the dwarves, to hear news of Smaug, you must go back again to the evening, by now 2 days earlier, when he smashed the door and flew off in a rage. The men of Lake Town, called Esgaroth in their tongue, saw suddenly a great light appear in a low place in the northern hills, and that end of the lake turned golden. A great cry went up. "The king beneath the mountain! The river is running gold from the mountain!" There was tremendous excitement, but one grim-faced fellow ran hot-foot to the town's master.
The dragon is coming, or I'm a fool. Cut the bridges! To arms! To arms!
Then warning trumpets were sounded, and so it was that the dragon didn't find them quite unprepared. Amid shrieks and wailing and the shouts of men, Smaug came roaring over the town. A hail of dark arrows leapt up and snapped and rattled on his scales and jewels. His wrath blazed to its height, for no one had dared to give battle to him for many an age. Nor would they have dared now, if it hadn't been for the grim-faced man, Bard was his name, who ran to and fro, cheering on the archers. Fire leapt from the dragon's jaws, and fire leapt from the thatched roofs. Another house, and then another sprang afire and fell, and still no arrow hindered Smaug, or hurt him more than a fly from the marshes. Soon all the town would be deserted, but there was still a company of archers that held their ground among the burning houses. Their captain was Bard, and he was a descendant of Girion, Lord of Dale, who had fallen when the dragon first came many lives of men before. Now all Bard's arrows but one were spent. The flames were near him. He bent his bow for the last time. Suddenly, out of the dark, the old thrush fluttered to his shoulder. Marvelling, Bard found he could understand its tongue, for he was of the race of Dale.
Wait! The moon is rising. Look for the hollow on the left breast as he flies and turns above you.
Then Bard drew his bowstring to his ear. The dragon swooped once more, lower than ever. The great bow twanged. The black arrow sped straight for the hollow by the left breast. In it smote and vanished, so swift was its flight. With a shriek that deafened men, Smaug crashed down from on high, in ruin. Full on the town he fell. The lake roared in. There was a gushing swirl, and then silence. And that was the end of Smaug and Esgaroth. And yet 3/4 of the people of the town had escaped alive, and the dragon was dead. They had really much to be thankful for. Even so, they gathered in mournful crowds on the western shore, complaining against the master, who'd been one of the earliest to leave the town, and praising the courage of Bard and his last mighty shot, and all were lamenting his loss. And then, in the very middle of their talk, a tall figure stepped from the shadows.
Bard is not lost. He dived from Esgaroth when the enemy was slain. I am Bard of the line of Girion. I am the slayer of the dragon.
"King Bard!" shouted the crowd. But the master ground his chattering teeth.
Girion was Lord of Dale and not King of Esgaroth. Let King Bard go back to his own kingdom. Nothing hinders his return. The wise will stay here and hope to rebuild our town.
But the people near at hand would have none of that, and soon the shore echoed to the cry, "Up the bowmen and down the money bags."
I am the last man to undervalue Bard the bowman, but why, oh people, why do I get all the blame? For what fault am I to be deposed? Who aroused the dragon from his slumber, I might ask? What sort of gold have they sent down the river to reward us? Dragon fire and ruin. From whom should we claim the recompense of our damage and aid for our widows and orphans?
And the people quite forgot their idea of a new king, and cried that the dwarves had stirred the dragon up against them deliberately.
Fools! Doubtless the dwarves perished first in fire before Smaug came to us. But this is no time for angry words. There is work to do. I serve you, master, still, though after a while I may go north with any that will follow me.
Then Bard strode off to help in the care of the sick and wounded. Now, everywhere Bard went, he found talk running like fire among the people concerning the vast treasure that was now unguarded, and he thought of Dale rebuilt. In the days that followed, there was much sickness and great hunger, and Bard took the lead in ordering the preparation for the people's protection and housing. Meanwhile, far over Mirkwood, tidings spread. Smaug is dead. The news had passed west, right to the Misty Mountains. Bjorn the Skin-Changer had heard it, and the goblins were at council in their caves. And all remembered the legend of the wealth of Thror. The elven king had received the news from his messengers and from the birds that loved his folk. So it was that Bard's messengers to him found him now marching with many spearmen and bowmen towards the mountain, even though it was only the 3rd day since the fall of Smaug. But the king had pity, and turned his march down the forest river towards the long lake. Only 5 days after the death of the dragon, they looked on the ruins of Esgaroth. Their welcome was good, and their plans soon made. The master, with men and elves of crafts, remained with the sick and weak, and set about raising huts against the coming winter. All the men of arms, and most of the elven king's array, marched north to the mountain. It was thus that in 11 days the head of their host came into the desolate lands. Well, now we can return to Bilbo and the dwarves. When morning came, they'd not heard or seen any sign of danger, but ever more thickly the birds were gathering. And suddenly Bilbo noticed the old thrush again.
He seems to have escaped when Smaug smashed the mountain.
The thrush fluttered his wings and sang, and then cocked his head on one side as if to listen. Balin spoke.
I believe he's trying to tell us something, but I cannot follow the speech of such birds. I only wish he was a raven. There used to be a great friendship between them and the people of Thror. There was a wise and famous pair, old Kark and his wife, that lived here above the guard chamber, but I don't suppose that any of that ancient breed linger here now.
No sooner had he finished speaking than the old thrush flew away.
We may not understand him, but that old bird understands us, I'm sure. Now, keep watch now and see what happens.
Well, tomorrow we'll tell you what does happen. Goodbye until then. Thorin, with his company of dwarves, and Bilbo Baggins, had passed through Smaug's treasure chamber, where Bilbo had found and kept to himself the great jewel, the heart of the mountain, the Arkenstone of Thrain. Fearing the return of Smaug, they'd left the mountain and made their way to the height called Raven Hill, the great southern spur of the mountain, flanking the valley before the gate. Here they camped in the stone-built lookout post. The old thrush that Bilbo had first seen when the secret door was revealed had reappeared. It seemed to be trying to talk to them. Balin spoke of the ravens, Kark and his mate, who had of old talked to the dwarves. The thrush, seeming to understand, had flown off. Before long, there was a fluttering of wings, and back came the thrush, and with him came an aged raven of great size. He spoke in ordinary language, not bird speech, and said he was Roak, son of Kark. Roak was now chief of the ravens on the mountain, but at that time his people were scattered, for they carried great tidings. Smaug was dead. Thus the story came to the dwarves, how Bard of the line of Girion, Lord of Dale, had slain the dragon, and how in his death throes Smaug had destroyed the lake town Esgaroth. Roak told, too, that many were eager for a share in the dragon's treasure. A host of wood elves was already on its way with the men of Esgaroth. Roak had almost ended his speech.
Your own wisdom must decide your course. But if you will listen to my counsel, you will not trust the master of the lake men, but rather him that shot the dragon. We would see peace after the long desolation, but it may cost you dear in gold. I have spoken.
Then Thorin burst forth in anger.
Our thanks, Roak, Kark's son, but none of our gold shall thieves take while we're alive. If you would earn our thanks still more, bring us news of any that draw near. Also, I would beg of you that you would send messengers specially to my cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has many people well armed. Bid him hasten.
Unwillingly, Roak agreed to do as he was asked, and Thorin ordered his company back to the mountain. Now, they still had some days before the elves and men could arrive, so they began to labour hard in fortifying the main entrance, the only one left open by the dragon. Also, with the aid of the ravens, Feely and Keely found 3 of the ponies, and in 4 days they brought from the riverbank the remainder of their hidden stores. So they had enough cram, that's food made by the lake men for long journeys, enough for many weeks. By this time, the front gate had been blocked with a high, thick wall of squared stones laid dry, and the dwarves had channeled the running river to form a wide pool before it. Approach to the gate was only possible along a narrow ledge of the cliff and then by ladder over the wall. There came a night when suddenly there were many lights, as of fires and torches in the valley between the arms of the mountain, and the next morning, early, a company bearing the green banner of the Elven King and the blue banner of the lake advanced until they stood right before the wall and the gate. Thorin hailed them, demanding who they were and what they wanted. Bard himself stood forward and greeted him. Then he claimed that a part of the dragon's hoard rightly belonged to his people, the men of the city of Dale, which had been destroyed long years before by Smaug. He also reminded Thorin that the people of Esgaroth had aided the dwarves and had been repaid only by the destruction of their town. Now these were fair words and true, but the dragon gold had been at work on Thorin's heart.
The treasure was not Smaug's, that his evil deeds should be amended with a share of it. The price of the goods that we received of the lake men we will fairly pay, in due time. But I will not parley with armed men at my gate, nor at all with the people of the Elven King. In this debate they have no place. Begone now, ere our arrows fly.
After that, Bard and his companions returned to their camp, but before many hours were passed, he sent a messenger, demanding from Thorin 1/12 portion of the treasure. But Thorin shot an arrow at the messenger, who then declared the mountain besieged. They would bear no weapons against the dwarves, but would leave them to eat their gold. With that, the messenger departed swiftly, and the dwarves were left to consider their case. Bilbo, of course, disapproved of the whole turn of affairs.
The whole place still stinks of dragon, and it makes me sick, and cram is beginning to stick in my throat.
The days passed slowly and wearily, and now Thorin spoke of the Arkenstone, and bade the others eagerly to look for it in every corner.
For the Arkenstone of my father is worth more than a river of gold in itself. That stone, of all the treasure, I name unto myself, and I will be avenged on anyone who finds it and withholds it.
Afraid though he was of Thorin, Bilbo didn't speak of the jewel, for the beginnings of a plan had come into his head. At that moment, the ravens brought news that Dane and more than 500 dwarves were very close, and that night Bilbo made up his mind. As soon as it was dark, he fetched from his bundle a rope and also the Arkenstone wrapped in a rag. Then he climbed to the top of the wall where Bomba was on watch until midnight. Pretending he couldn't sleep, the hobbit offered to take his place for a while, and the fat old dwarf was only too grateful to accept. As soon as he'd gone, Bilbo put on his ring, fastened his rope, slipped down over the wall, and was gone. He quickly found elvish sentries, and soon he was sitting talking to the elven king and bard, explaining his proposition.
Now, I have an interest in this matter. 1/14th share, to be precise. Personally, I'm only too ready to deduct what is right from the total before putting in my own claim. However, I assure you, Thorin Oakenshield is quite ready to sit on a heap of gold and starve as long as you sit here.
Well, let him. Such a fool deserves to starve.
Quite so, but there will be difficulties. Dane of the Iron Hills is now less than 2 days' march off, and has at least 500 grim dwarves with him.
Why do you tell us this? Are you betraying friends? Or are you threatening us?
My dear Bard, don't be so hasty. I am merely trying to avoid trouble for all concerned. Now, I will make you an offer.
Let us hear it.
You may see it!
And Bilbo drew forth the Arkenstone. It was as if a globe had been filled with moonlight and hung before them in a net woven of the glint of frosty stars.
This is the Arkenstone of Thrain, and Thorin values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining.
But how is it yours to give?
Oh, well, it isn't exactly, but, well, I'm willing to let it stand against my claim. Anyway, I'm going back now, and the dwarves can do what they like to me. I hope you'll find it useful.
The elven king looked at Bilbo with a new wonder, and advised him to remain with them. But politely, the hobbit insisted on returning to his friends. An escort was provided for him, and as they passed through the camp, an old man, wrapped in a dark cloak, came towards them.
Well done, Mr. Baggins. There is always more about you than anyone expects.
It was Gandalf. For the first time for many a day, Bilbo was really delighted. But there was no time now for all his questions.
All in good time. There is an unpleasant time just in front of you, but keep your heart up. There is news brewing that even the ravens have not heard. Good night.
Puzzled but cheered, Bilbo hurried on, and when he clambered back up his rope again, it was still well before midnight. Next day, at about midday, the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. Bard was there, and the elven king. Before them, an old man wrapped in a cloak and hood bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood. It was Bard who spoke first, asking if Thorin was still of the same mind. But the dwarf was angry that the elves had not departed, and he would listen to no further parley. Then the old man opened the casket and held aloft the Arkenstone of Thrain. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. Thorin was at first struck dumb with amazement and confusion, but then he demanded how they came by an heirloom of his house.
I gave it them.
You miserable hobbit! You undersized burglar! Oh, I wish I had Gandalf here. Curse him for his choice of you. May his beard wither.
Your wish is granted. Here is Gandalf. And none too soon, it seems. Listen now to what the burglar has to say.
Oh, dear me. Well, you may remember saying that I might choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. Take it that I've disposed of my share as I wished and let it go at that.
I will, and I will let you go at that. And may we never meet again. I am betrayed. For the Arkenstone I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, but that shall be accounted the promised share of this traitor. You can divide it as you will. Take him if you wish him to live, and no friendship goes with him.
You're not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain, but things may change yet.
And so Bilbo was swung down from the wall and departed with nothing for all his trouble, except the mithril armour which Thorin had given him already. More than one of the dwarves in their hearts felt shame and pity at his going. Promising to return the next day at noon to collect the treasure, Bard and the others, with Bilbo, went back to the camp. Early the next morning, runners came into the camp to report. Dane and his host of dwarves had appeared round the eastern spur of the mountain and were now hastening to Dale. Before long, the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. Bard and the Elven King still hoped for peace, but the raven messengers had been busy between Dane and Thorin, and suddenly, without a signal, the dwarves sprang silently forward to attack. Battle was about to commence. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurried over the sky, and beneath it another blackness could be seen whirling forward, so dense that no light could be seen. Gandalf appeared, and stood alone between dwarves and men, and his staff blazed forth with a flash like lightning.
Halt! Dread has come upon you all, the goblins are upon you. Behold, the bats are above their army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train. Come, there is yet time for counsel. Let Dane, son of Nain, come swiftly to us.
And so began the battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of the Five Armies. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild wolves, and upon the other were elves and men and dwarves. Now, ever since Gandalf had killed the great goblin of the Misty Mountains, the hatred of the goblins for dwarves had rekindled to fury. A great number had gathered by stealth at their capital, Mount Gundabad in the north. Then, hard on the heels of Dane, they had come, unobserved even by the ravens. The only hope of the Elven King, with Bard and Dane, was to lure the goblins with a trap. On the southern spur of the mountain, the elves were set. On the eastern spur were men and dwarves. Ere long, the vanguard of the goblin multitude swirled round the spur's end and came rushing into Dale. A few brave men were strung before them to make a feint of resistance, and many there fell before the rest drew back and fled to either side. As Gandalf had hoped, the goblin army gathered behind the resisted vanguard and poured now into the valley, seeking for the foe in fury and disorder. The elves were the first to charge. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom, so deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. The yells were deafening, and the rocks were stained black with goblin blood. With cries of Moria and Dane, Dane, the dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon the other side, and beside them came the men of the lake with long swords. Panic came upon the goblins, and victory seemed at hand, when a cry rang out on the heights above. Goblins had scaled the mountain from the other side, and already many were streaming down recklessly to attack. Victory now vanished from hope. The defenders had only stemmed the first onslaught of the goblin tide. Tomorrow, we'll tell you how the Battle of the Five Armies ended, and also what happened to Bilbo. Goodbye, until then. Aided by the Elven King, Bard had led a great force of men to the Lonely Mountain, hoping for recompense from the dragon horde for the destruction of Esgaroth. There, they had found alive all the company of Thorin Oakenshield, who had prepared themselves for a long siege. But Bilbo had smuggled out the Arkenstone, a jewel of tremendous worth to Thorin. Gandalf had returned, and with his help, Bard and the Elven King bargained with Thorin for the jewel. Angered beyond measure, Thorin sent Bilbo away, promising that the hobbit's 14th share of the treasure was all the ransom he'd pay. At that time, Dane and the 500 dwarves of the Iron Hills had arrived, and war seemed likely. Then suddenly, a greater enemy appeared. A multitude of goblins and wild wolves, led by Bolg, had descended in force. Under Gandalf's guidance, men and dwarves had stemmed the first tide of the enemy, But now the goblins had climbed the mountain from the north and were pouring down the mountainside above the dwarf gate. In the middle of all this, I may say, Bilbo had slipped on his magic ring, and thus vanished from sight, if not all danger. Day drew on, and the battle of the 5 armies continued. Now Bard was fighting to defend the eastern spur, and yet giving slowly back, and the elf lords were at bay near to the watchpost on Ravenhill. Suddenly there was a great shout, and part of the wall in front of the gate fell outward. Out leapt Thorin, king under the mountain, and his companions. They rushed forward into battle, and Thorin's voice shook like a horn in the valley.
To me! To me! Elves and men, to me! Oh, my kinfolk!
Down, heedless of order, rushed all the dwarves of Dane to his help, and Thorin drove right against the bodyguard of Bolg. But soon the attackers were attacked, and they were forced into a great circle hemmed all about with goblins and wolves. And on the mountain, too, men and elves were being slowly beaten down. On all this, Bilbo looked with misery.
Oh, it will not be long now before the goblins win the gate and we're all slaughtered or captured. Oh, misery me! I've always understood that defeat may be glorious. It seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it.
The clouds were torn by the wind, and a red sunset slashed the west. Bilbo looked around, and then he gave a great cry. He'd seen a sight that made his heart leap.
The eagles! The eagles! The eagles are coming!
And at that moment, a stone, hurtling from above, smote him heavily on his helm, and he fell with a crash and knew no more. When he came to himself, he was literally by himself, lying on the flat stones of Ravenhill in broad daylight. He sat up painfully. Suddenly he was aware of a man climbing up towards him, and he called. The man was astounded, for there was no one in sight. Hurriedly, Bilbo took off his ring and called again. The man had been sent by Gandalf specially to look for the hobbit, and soon Bilbo was standing before a tent in the valley, and there was the wizard with his arm in a sling.
Well, I never alive, after all, I am glad. But other news can wait, come.
And Gandalf led Bilbo into the tent.
Hail, Thorin, I have brought him.
There indeed lay Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds.
Farewell, good thief. I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is restored. I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back my words and deeds at the gate.
Farewell, King under the mountain. This is a bitter adventure, if it must end so. Yet I am glad that I have shared in your perils. That has been more than any Baggins deserves.
No, there is more in you of good than you know, child of the kindly West. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell.
Then Bilbo turned away and went by himself, and wept until his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. All that had happened after he was stunned, Bilbo learned later. The great eagle of the Misty Mountains had long been aware of the goblins' mustering. With many followers, he'd come in a nick of time and dislodged the goblins from the mountain slopes, letting elves and men come at last to the help of Thorin's battle below. Also in that last hour, Bjorn, the skin-changer, had appeared. He came alone and in bear's shape. He broke like a clap of thunder through the ring around the dwarves. He scattered the bodyguard and pulled down Bolg himself and crushed him. Then dismay fell on the goblins, and they fled in all directions, and weariness fell from their enemies with the coming of new hope. Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin warriors of the north perished that day, and the mountains had peace for many a year. They buried Thorin deep beneath the mountain, and Bard laid the Arkenstone on his breast. There now Dane, son of Nain, took up his abode, and he became king under the mountain. Of the 12 companions of Thorin, 10 remained. Fili and Kili had fallen, defending him with shield and body. The others remained with Dane, for Dane dealt his treasure well. There was, of course, no longer any question of dividing the hoard in such shares as had been planned, yet a 14th share of all the silver and gold was given up to Bard, for Dane said,
We will honour the agreement of the dead, but Thorin has now the Arkenstone in his keeping.
From that treasure, greater than that of many mortal kings, Bard sent much gold to the master of Lake Town. To Bilbo, Bard said,
This treasure is as much yours as it is mine. And even though you were willing to lay aside all your claim, I would reward you most richly of all.
Oh, very kind of you, but really, it's a relief to me. How on earth I should have got all that treasure home, I don't know.
In the end, Bilbo would only take 2 small chests filled with gold and silver, such as one strong pony could carry. At last, the time came for him to say goodbye.
Farewell, Balin, and farewell, Dwalin, and farewell, Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin and Gloin, Bifur, Bofur, and Bomber. May your beards never grow thin.
Then Bilbo turned towards the mountain.
Farewell, Thorin Oakenshield, and Fili and Kili. May your memory never fade.
Then the dwarves bowed low, and Balin answered him.
Goodbye, and good luck wherever you fare. If ever you visit us again, then the feast shall indeed be splendid.
If ever you're passing my way, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time.
Then he turned away. The elf host was on the march. Gandalf and Bilbo rode behind the Elven King, and beside them strode Beorn. They travelled together as far as the borders of Mirkwood, but Gandalf and Bilbo intended to go round the forest's northern end with Beorn. Before they parted, Bilbo brought out a necklace of silver and pearls that Dane had given him, and offered it to the Elven King.
In what way have I earned such a gift, O Hobbit?
Oh, well, I thought that some little return should be made for your hospitality. I mean, even a burglar has his feelings.
I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent, and I name you elf friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less. Farewell.
Then the elves turned towards the forest, and Bilbo started on his long road home. Yuletide, Gandalf and Bilbo spent in Beorn's house. Beorn became a great chief in those regions, and it's said that for many generations the men of his line had the power of taking bears' shape. It was not until May the 1st that Bilbo and Gandalf came back at last to Rivendell, where stood the last, or first, homely house. Elrond welcomed them, and there were many eager ears that evening to hear the tale of their adventures. It was then that Bilbo learned where Gandalf had gone between their entry to Mirkwood and the Battle of the 5 Armies. It appeared that he'd been to a great council of white wizards, masters of law and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood, though both Elrond and Gandalf feared that the necromancer could not be banished yet from this world. Then there were other tales, and yet more tales, till Bilbo's head fell forward on his chest, and he snored comfortably in a corner. But weariness fell soon from the travellers in that house, and after a week, Bilbo rode away with Gandalf.
My back is to legends, and we are coming home.
Well, there's a long road yet.
But it is the last road.
When they reached the place where they'd had their nasty adventure with the trolls, they found the gold still hidden and untouched.
You'd better take this, Gandalf. I dare say you can find a use for it.
Indeed I can, but share and share alike. You may find you have more needs than you expect.
So they put the gold in bags and slung them on the ponies. As all things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when, coming to the top of a rise, Bilbo could see his own hill in the distance. He stopped suddenly.
Roads go ever, ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea. Roads go ever, ever on, under cloud and under star. Yet feet that wandering have gone turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known.
My dear Bilbo, something is the matter with you. You're not the hobbit that you were.
And so they crossed the bridge over the water and came right back to Bilbo's own gate, where there was a notice.
The effects of the late Bilbo Baggins, Esquire of Bag End Underhill, will be sold by auction on June the 22nd, sale to commence at 10 o'clock sharp.
It was now nearly lunchtime, and most of the things had already been sold. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody that said so was sorry to find the presumption wrong. The legal bother lasted for years, and in the end, to save time, Bilbo had to buy back quite a lot of his own furniture. But many of his silver spoons had mysteriously disappeared and were never accounted for. Personally, he suspected his cousins, the Sackville Bagginses. Indeed, Bilbo found he'd lost more than spoons. He was no longer quite respectable. And I'm sorry to say, he didn't mind. He took to writing poetry and visiting elves, and though few hobbits believed any of his tales, he remained very happy to the end of his days. His sword hung over the mantelpiece, his coat of mail he lent to a museum. His magic ring he kept a great secret. But what happened to that is another story. One autumn evening there was a knock at Bilbo's door. It was Gandalf and Balin. They fell to talking of their times together, of course, and Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain. Bard had rebuilt the town in Dale, and all the valley was filled with blossoms in spring and fruit and feasting in autumn. And Lake Town was refounded, and more prosperous than ever. But the old master had come to a bad end. He'd taken most of Bard's gold and fled with it, and died of starvation in the waste, deserted by his companions. The new master, Gandalf said, was of a wiser kind, and there were songs which said that in his day the rivers ran with gold.
Then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion.
Oh, of course. But surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escape were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? I'm very fond of you, Mr. Baggins, but you're only quite a little fellow in a wide world, after all.
Thank goodness.
And Bilbo laughed and handed Gandalf the tobacco jar. Goodbye.